The letter trembled in Josephine Franklin's hand as the train's whistle pierced the late afternoon air. Her father had sold her to a stranger, a cattle baron from the Montana Territory, who needed a wife. The year was 1875, and at 20 years old, she was leaving behind everything she'd ever known in Boston for an uncertain future in the wild frontier. "Remember what I told you," her mother had whispered during their tearful goodbye. "Submit to his will, no matter how cruel. It is a woman's duty to obey her husband." Those words echoed in Josephine's mind as the locomotive slowed, steam hissing from its metal flanks. Through the window, she glimpsed the small frontier town of Silver Creek, little more than a dusty main street lined with wooden structures. Her heart raced, anxiety tightening her chest as the train lurched to a stop. She'd heard stories about these frontier men, rough, violent, and uncivilized. According to her father's letter, her betrothed was Daniel Thornton, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory. Would he be as harsh and unforgiving as the land he tamed? Josephine smoothed her navy traveling dress, checked her carefully pinned hair in the small hand mirror from her reticule, and gathered her courage. The porter helped her down from the train, setting her 2 trunks on the wooden platform beside her. She stood motionless, scanning the faces of the few people milling about the station. Her letter had specified she would arrive on this train, but no one approached her. Perhaps he had forgotten. Or worse, changed his mind upon learning more about her from her father's correspondence. Just as panic began to rise in her throat, a tall figure separated from the shadows of the station building. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to life in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in a way city men never were. As he drew closer, Josephine could make out his features: sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw darkened by stubble, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wasn't handsome in the refined way of Boston gentlemen, but there was something compelling about his weathered face. "Miss Franklin." His voice was deep, with the slight drawl she'd come to associate with Westerners. She nodded, unable to find her voice. "I'm Daniel Thornton." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. "Welcome to Montana Territory." Josephine dropped into a small curtsy, eyes downcast as she'd been taught. "Mr. Thornton, thank you for meeting me. I hope I find you well, sir." When he didn't immediately respond, she risked glancing up. He was studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "I reckon we should get something straight from the beginning, Miss Franklin." His tone was serious, and Josephine braced herself for whatever harsh rules he might lay down. Instead, he said softly, "I know this isn't what you wanted. I know your father arranged this match without your consent." He took a step closer. "I want you to know that I'll be kind to you. You have my word on that." Josephine blinked, certain she had misheard him. I beg your pardon." A small smile touched his lips. "I said I'll be kind to you. That's a promise." For the first time since receiving her father's devastating news, Josephine felt something other than dread. It wasn't hope, not yet, but perhaps the faintest whisper of possibility. "Now," Daniel continued, "let's get your things loaded. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch, and I'd like to make it before dark." He signaled to a young man who hurried forward to collect her trunks, loading them onto a wagon parked nearby. "That's Tommy, one of my ranch hands," Daniel explained. "He'll take your trunks. You'll ride with me in the buggy if that's agreeable." It wasn't a question, not really, but the fact that he phrased it as one surprised her. "Yes, that would be fine," she replied, watching as he offered his arm to escort her. The buggy was well-maintained but clearly functional rather than ornamental. Daniel helped her climb onto the seat, his hand strong but careful at her elbow. Once she was settled, he walked around and took his place beside her, giving her a respectful amount of space. As they pulled away from the station, Josephine stole glances at the man who was to be her husband. His profile was striking: a straight nose, firm lips, and that strong jawline. His hands holding the reins were calloused and tanned, the hands of a man who worked alongside his employees. "I expect you have questions," he said, breaking the silence. Josephine hesitated. In Boston, women were taught to be agreeable and undemanding, but she was no longer in Boston. "Yes," she admitted. "Many, in fact." Daniel nodded. "Ask them, all of them. I want no secrets between us." "Why me?" The question burst from her before she could consider its propriety. "I mean to say, why would you agree to marry a woman you've never met?" He was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses down the main street of Silver Creek. People nodded respectfully as they passed. "Montana's a hard place," he finally said. "Beautiful but hard. Men outnumber women 10 to 1 out here. I've built something good with my ranch, but a house needs a woman's touch to make it a home." He glanced at her. "Your father wrote that you're educated, from a good family, and of a sensible nature. Said you were looking for a husband." Josephine's lips tightened. "My father exaggerated. I wasn't looking for a husband at all." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "No, no." She twisted her hands in her lap. "My father arranged this match because I refused the suitors he selected in Boston. He said I was too headstrong, too opinionated for a proper lady." To her surprise, Daniel chuckled. "Sounds like qualities a woman might need out here." They passed the last buildings of Silver Creek, and the landscape opened before them: rolling hills covered in golden grass, with mountains rising blue and majestic in the distance. The vastness of it stole Josephine's breath. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Daniel agreed. "That's Thornton land, starting at that fence line. Goes all the way to those hills you see to the north." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Your father mentioned you built this ranch yourself," she said. Daniel nodded. "Came out here with nothing but a horse and the clothes on my back when I was 18. Worked as a hand on other ranches, saved every penny. Bought my first parcel of land 8 years ago. Now I've got the largest spread in the county, nearly 5,000 head of cattle." "That's impressive," Josephine said, genuinely admiring his accomplishment. "Thank you." He glanced at her again. "Your father also mentioned you're good with numbers and have helped with his business correspondence." Josephine nodded cautiously. "Yes, though he wasn't pleased when he discovered I was doing more than just copying his letters." "What do you mean?" "I was improving them, finding better ways to phrase things, suggesting different approaches to business problems." She sighed. "He didn't appreciate my initiative." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I could use someone with a head for business. Ranch accounts are getting complicated as we grow." Josephine turned to look at him directly, surprised. "You would trust me with your business affairs?" "Why not? You're educated and you'll be my wife." He shrugged. "Partners should help each other, shouldn't they?" Partners. The word lingered in Josephine's mind. No man had ever suggested such a thing to her before. As they traveled, Daniel pointed out landmarks and explained aspects of ranching that were foreign to her city upbringing. He spoke with passion about his cattle, his breeding program, and his plans for expanding. Josephine found herself drawn into his vision, asking questions that seemed to please him with their insight. The sun was setting when they crested a hill, and Daniel pulled the horses to a stop. "There it is," he said. "Thornton Ranch." Below them sprawled a collection of buildings centered around a large 2-story house built of sturdy logs and stone. Outbuildings, corrals, and a barn formed a horseshoe around a central yard. Smoke curled from the main house's chimney, and lanterns were being lit as darkness approached. "It's larger than I expected," Josephine admitted. "Started with just a 1-room cabin. Daniel said. "Built the main house 3 years ago. Upstairs still needs some finishing work, but it's solid and warm." They continued down the hill, and as they approached, Josephine saw several people emerge from the buildings. A woman in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, stood on the porch of the main house. 4 or 5 cowboys gathered near the corral, curiosity evident in their stances. Daniel helped Josephine down from the buggy, his hand lingering on her arm a moment longer than necessary. "Mrs. Winters," he called to the older woman. "This is Miss Franklin." The woman approached, her expression unreadable as she assessed Josephine. "Welcome to Thornton Ranch, miss. I'm the housekeeper. Got your room ready and a hot meal waiting." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters," Josephine replied. Uncertain of the woman's cool reception, Daniel cleared his throat. "I should introduce you to the men." He guided her toward the cowboys, who shuffled their feet and removed their hats as she approached. "Boys, this is Miss Josephine Franklin. She's come all the way from Boston to be my wife." A chorus of Madam and Miss Franklin greeted her, along with curious stares. "The wedding's set for Saturday," Daniel continued. "Pastor Wilson will ride out from town." Josephine's heart skipped a beat. Saturday was only 3 days away. She hadn't expected things to move so quickly. Daniel must have sensed her tension, for he added quietly, "Unless you'd prefer more time to settle in." Again, his consideration surprised her. "No," she said after a moment. "Saturday is fine." They went inside, where Mrs. Winters had prepared a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. The dining room was simply furnished but clean, with a long table that could seat at least a dozen people. "Where are the rest of your men?" Josephine asked as they ate. "Most bunk in the bunkhouse," Daniel explained. "Only the foreman and I take meals in the main house, and he's out checking the north pasture tonight." Mrs. Winters served them silently, her movements efficient but somehow disapproving. When she left the room, Josephine couldn't help asking, "Have I offended your housekeeper in some way?" Daniel looked up from his plate, surprised. "Mrs. Winters? No, she's just protective. Been with me since I built this place. Probably worried about what changes you might make." "I see." Josephine hesitated. "And will there be changes?" Daniel set down his fork. "This will be your home, Josephine. Your domain to manage as you see fit. Mrs. Winters knows that, and you?" she asked boldly. "What do you expect of me as your wife?" He considered her question carefully. "I expect honesty, loyalty, and in return I'll give you the same." He paused. "I don't expect you to love me, not at first, but I hope we might build something good together, something based on mutual respect." His directness was refreshing after the veiled conversations of Boston society. "I would like that," she admitted softly. After dinner, Daniel showed her to her room, a simply furnished but comfortable chamber with a carved wooden bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk near the window. Her trunks had already been brought up. "My room is across the hall," he said, lingering in the doorway. "Until we're married, of course, after that." He cleared his throat. "Well, we can discuss those arrangements later." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you for your consideration, Mr. Thornton." "Daniel," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you should use my given name." "Daniel," she repeated, liking the way it felt on her tongue. "And you must call me Josephine." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Josephine." He hesitated, then added, "Sleep well. Tomorrow, if you'd like, I can show you around the ranch." "I would like that very much." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process the day's events. This man was nothing like she had expected. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged exterior, a thoughtfulness she hadn't anticipated. For the first time since leaving Boston, She allowed herself to consider that perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be the prison sentence she had feared. Perhaps, just perhaps, there might be happiness to be found here in this wild, beautiful land with this unexpected man. Dawn broke over Thornton Ranch in a blaze of pink and gold that filtered through the simple calico curtains of Josephine's room. For a moment upon waking, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar sounds and smells of the ranch house confusing her city-trained senses. Then memory returned the long journey, the dusty frontier town, and Daniel Thornton with his surprising promise of kindness. She rose and dressed in one of her simpler day dresses, a pale blue cotton that wouldn't show dust too badly. As she pinned her hair into a modest chignon, she considered her situation with clearer morning eyes. However kind Daniel might be, she was still effectively being sold into marriage by her father. She would need to be cautious, observe carefully, and determine what kind of man her future husband truly was. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Franklin." Mrs. Winter's voice called. "Breakfast is ready downstairs when you are." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I'll be down shortly." Josephine gave herself one final assessment in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman who looked back at her appeared composed, but her eyes betrayed her nervousness. Drawing a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and headed downstairs. The main floor of the house was more spacious than she had realized the previous evening. A large sitting room with simple but solid furniture opened onto the dining room she'd seen last night. Beyond that, she glimpsed a well-appointed kitchen where Mrs. Winters was busy at the stove. Daniel rose from his seat at the table when she entered. "Good morning, Josephine. I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you." It wasn't entirely true she had tossed and turned much of the night, but it seemed the polite response. Mrs. Winters brought out plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with gravy. The food was simple but delicious, and Josephine realized she was famished. "I thought we might ride out this morning," Daniel said as they ate. "Show you the ranch. Can you ride?" Josephine nodded. "Yes, though I'm accustomed to side saddle." Daniel frowned slightly. "Most women out here ride astride. Safer when you're covering rough country. But I can have a side saddle put on if you prefer." Josephine considered this. The idea of riding astride in a dress seemed scandalous, but she was no longer in Boston society. "I'm willing to try riding Western style if you think it best." A smile touched his lips. "That's the spirit. I've got a gentle mare that would suit you, and perhaps you might borrow some riding clothes from Mrs. Winters until we can have something made for you." The housekeeper, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, sniffed disapprovingly but nodded. "I've got an old split skirt that might do, though it'll need taking in. The girl's thin as a rail." An hour later, Josephine found herself seated astride a dappled gray mare named Dove, wearing a divided skirt that Mrs. Winters had hastily altered with a few swift stitches. The sensation was strange but not unpleasant, and she found she had much better control of the horse than she ever had riding side saddle. Daniel, mounted on a magnificent chestnut stallion, watched her with approval. "You have a good seat," he commented. "Have you ridden much?" "In the city parks, yes. My mother thought it a suitable accomplishment for a young lady, though my father considered it a waste of time." Daniel's expression darkened slightly at the mention of her father, but he said nothing, instead gesturing toward the eastern pastures. "Let's head this way first. I want to show you the spring creek and the new calves." They rode at a leisurely pace, Daniel pointing out features of the ranch and explaining his operation. Josephine was impressed by the scope of what he had built and the clear planning that had gone into it. This was no fly-by-night operation, but a carefully constructed enterprise designed to last generations. "How many men do you employ?" she asked, as they paused on a hillside overlooking a valley where hundreds of cattle grazed. 15 regular hands year-round, more during spring roundup and fall drive. Got a good foreman, Jack Miller, who's been with me almost from the beginning. He pointed to a distant figure on horseback moving among the cattle. That's him now, checking the herd. And Mrs. Winters. Has she always been your housekeeper? Daniel's expression softened. She came out here with her husband about 5 years ago. He was my first foreman. When he was killed in a stampede, I offered her the position of housekeeper. She's like family now. Josephine nodded, understanding better the woman's protective attitude toward Daniel. She cares for you a great deal. She does. He turned to look at her directly. She's worried I'll get my heart broken. The directness of his statement caught Josephine off guard. I would never intentionally hurt you, Daniel. I know that. His blue eyes were serious. But this isn't a conventional courtship. We're strangers being bound together by contract, not by choice. My father always said that love was a luxury, not a necessity in marriage, Josephine replied carefully. Daniel's expression was unreadable. And what do you believe? It was a dangerous question. If she were honest about her romantic ideals, would he think her foolish? If she agreed with her father's pragmatic view, would she be setting herself up for a loveless union? I believe, she said slowly. That respect must come first. Perhaps affection might follow in time. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. A sensible approach. They continued their ride, cresting a hill that revealed a view even more spectacular than the one from the previous evening. The ranch spread out below them, but beyond that, the mountains rose majestically, their peaks still capped with snow despite the June warmth. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen, Josephine breathed. Daniel's face glowed with pride. It is, isn't it? First time I saw this view, I knew this was where I wanted to build my home. He paused, then added more softly, raise my family. The implication hung in the air between them. Children. Of course there would be children. Josephine felt her cheeks warm at the thought. To cover her embarrassment, she asked, "How did you come to Montana Territory? You mentioned you arrived when you were 18. Daniel nodded, turning his horse to follow a trail that led down toward a creek lined with cottonwood trees. Left home in Missouri after my parents died. Pa was a farmer, never had much. When fever took him and Ma in the same week, there wasn't anything to keep me there." "I'm sorry for your loss," Josephine said softly. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight inclination of his head. "Worked my way west, took whatever jobs I could find. Ended up on the Thompson, spread about 40 miles from here. Old man Thompson taught me everything I know about cattle. When he retired, he backed me with a small herd to start my own place." A smile touched his lips. "Paid him back with interest 3 years later." They reached the creek, and Daniel dismounted, coming around to help Josephine down. His hands spanned her waist, lifting her easily from the saddle. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. He stepped back, releasing her perhaps a bit too quickly. "Thought we might rest the horses for a bit. There's a nice spot just ahead where we can sit." He led her to a small clearing beside the creek, where a fallen log provided a natural bench. The horses drank from the clear water, and Josephine found herself enchanted by the peaceful scene. "You miss Boston?" Daniel asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Josephine considered the question seriously. "I miss certain aspects of city life, the libraries, the theaters, the museums, but Boston itself." She shook her head. "No, I don't think I'll miss it much at all." "Not even your family?" Her expression tightened. "My mother, perhaps, but she's been an invalid for years, rarely leaving her room. My father." She trailed off, unsure how to explain the complicated relationship. "You don't have to talk about him if you don't want to," Daniel said gently. "No, it's all right." She gathered her thoughts. "My father is a businessman first and foremost. Everything in his life is evaluated for its profit potential, including his daughter." Daniel's jaw tightened. "He wrote that you were eager for this match." Josephine laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I'm afraid he misrepresented the situation rather drastically. In truth, I refused the matches he arranged in Boston, aging widowers and dissolute second sons who wanted my dowry to pay their gambling debts. So he sent you as far away as possible, to a man who couldn't know any better." Daniel's voice had a dangerous edge. "Essentially, yes." She looked up at him. "I'm sorry for the deception. If you wish to cry off, no." The word was firm, decisive. "I made you a promise, Josephine. I intend to keep it." A warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the play of sunlight on the water. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "I should be honest with you as well. I've been thinking about taking a wife for some time, but there aren't many unmarried women in these parts, and those who are—" He hesitated. "Let's just say they weren't the sort I wanted to make the mother of my children." "So you wrote to a marriage broker," Josephine finished for him. He nodded. "I specified I wanted an educated woman from a good family, someone who could help build something lasting here." "Your father responded to the advertisement and sent you a catalog of my qualities, no doubt," Josephine said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Like a prize heifer." Daniel winced. "I didn't think of it that way." "No, I don't suppose you would." She sighed, then tried to soften her tone. "I don't blame you, Daniel. You were looking for a wife through the only means available to you. My father was the one who treated me like property to be sold." He studied her face intently. "For what it's worth, your father's letter didn't do you justice. He described you as pleasant-looking and even-tempered." Despite herself, Josephine laughed. "Well, he got at least one of those things wrong." Daniel smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. "I'm glad of it. I'd rather have a woman with spirit than a doormat who only says what she thinks I want to hear." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Daniel stood, his posture suddenly alert as a rider approached at a gallop. It was the foreman, Jack Miller, his face grim. "Boss. Got trouble at the north boundary. Jenkins says he found 3 of our steers shot dead just inside the fence line." Daniel's expression hardened. "Roland," Miller nodded. "Looks like his work. Left his brand carved into one of the carcasses. Damn him." Daniel turned to Josephine. "I'm sorry, but I need to see to this." "Of course," she said, rising quickly. "Is there anything I can do?" He seemed surprised by her offer. "No, but thank you. This is something I need to handle myself." He helped her mount Dove, then swung onto his own horse. "Jack, escort Miss Franklin back to the house, then meet me at the north fence with 3 of the men." "Yes, sir." Daniel turned to Josephine. "I may be late returning. Don't wait dinner for me." With that, he spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving Josephine with the foreman and 1,000 questions about what had just happened. Miller, a weathered man in his early 40s with kind eyes, seemed to read her confusion. "Roland Maddox," he explained as they rode at a more sedate pace toward the ranch house. "Owns the next spread over, been trying to push out smaller ranchers for years. The boss is the only one who stands up to him." "Is he dangerous?" Miller's expression was grim. "Yes, madam, I'd say he is. Hasn't moved directly against the boss yet, but killing cattle is a step up from his usual tricks." Josephine felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach. This was the reality of life in the West, not just the beautiful vistas and promise of opportunity, but danger and violence as well. When they reached the ranch house, Josephine thanked Miller and watched as he gathered several armed cowboys and rode out in the direction Daniel had gone. Mrs. Winters was waiting on the porch, her face tight with worry. "Roland's causing trouble again?" she asked. Josephine nodded. "Mr. Miller said he killed some cattle." The older woman sighed heavily. "That man won't be satisfied until there's blood spilled, and not just from cattle." She shook her head. "Come inside, girl. No use fretting on the porch." Inside, Mrs. Winters put Josephine to work helping prepare dinner, perhaps sensing that idle hands would only feed her worry. As they worked side by side, peeling potatoes and rolling out dough for biscuits, the housekeeper gradually warmed to her. "How do you find the ranch?" Mrs. Winters asked. "It's impressive," Josephine replied honestly. "Daniel has built something remarkable here. That he has." Pride shone in the older woman's eyes. "Worked himself half to death doing it too. Man deserves some happiness." Josephine sensed an unspoken question in the woman's words. "I will do my best to be a good wife to him, Mrs. Winters." The housekeeper studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "No. Thought you'd be some fancy city girl, looking down your nose at all of us, making demands to change everything." She sniffed. "Still might be, I suppose. Time will tell." "I have no intention of making unnecessary changes," Josephine assured her. "But I do hope to be useful here, not just decorative." Mrs. Winters nodded approvingly. "Good. Man needs a partner, not a porcelain doll." They worked in companionable silence for a while longer before Josephine gathered her courage to ask, "This man Roland, how dangerous is he, truly?" Mrs. Winters' hands stilled on the dough she was kneading. "Killed 2 men that I know of. Called it self-defense both times, but everyone knows better." She looked up, her eyes hard. "He wants this land. Daniel's the only thing standing in his way." "Surely the law's 3 days' ride from here, girl. Out here, a man protects what's his or he loses it." She resumed kneading with more force than necessary. "Daniel can handle himself. Don't you worry about that." But Josephine did worry, all through the evening and into the night. She ate a quiet dinner with Mrs. Winters, then retired to her room with a book, though she found it impossible to concentrate on the words. Every sound from outside brought her to the window, peering into the darkness for some sign of Daniel's return. It was past midnight when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Throwing a shawl over her nightdress, she hurried to the window and saw Daniel dismounting, his movements weary. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by concern as she noticed how he favored his right arm. Without thinking about propriety, she hurried downstairs and opened the front door just as he was about to enter. "Daniel," she exclaimed, then lowered her voice, conscious of the late hour. "Are you hurt?" He looked surprised to see her, his eyes traveling quickly over her nightdress and shawl before returning to her face. "Just a graze," he said, stepping inside. "What are you doing up?" "I was worried," she admitted. "Mrs. Winters told me about Roland Maddox." Daniel's expression darkened. "She shouldn't have troubled you with that." "I asked," Josephine said. "Let me see your arm." For a moment he looked like he might refuse, but then he sighed and shrugged out of his jacket, wincing slightly. The right sleeve of his shirt was torn and darkened with blood. "Sit down," she instructed, indicating a chair in the sitting room. "I'll get some water and bandages." To her surprise, he complied without argument. When she returned with a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and bandages that Mrs. Winters had shown her earlier, Daniel had removed his shirt. Josephine faltered momentarily at the sight of his bare chest, broad and muscled from years of physical labor, but quickly composed herself. This was no time for maidenly shyness. The wound was a deep furrow along his upper arm where a bullet had grazed him. It had mostly stopped bleeding but looked angry and painful. "This needs cleaning," she said, dipping a cloth in the warm water. "It may sting." Daniel remained stoic as she gently cleaned the wound, only the slight tightening around his eyes betraying his discomfort. Josephine worked efficiently, drawing on the nursing skills she had learned caring for her mother. "You're good at this," he commented as she began wrapping the bandage around his arm. "My mother has been ill for many years," she explained. "I learned to dress wounds and administer medicines out of necessity." "I'm sorry about your mother, thank you." She secured the bandage with a neat knot. "There, it should heal cleanly if kept dry and clean." Daniel flexed his arm experimentally, then nodded his approval. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and Josephine suddenly became acutely aware of their situation, she in her night clothes. He half-dressed, alone in the quiet house with everyone else asleep. Heat crept into her cheeks. "I should go back upstairs," she said, gathering the basin and soiled cloths. "Josephine." His voice stopped her. "Thank you for waiting up, for caring." The simple sincerity in his words touched her. "Of course, we're to be partners, aren't we?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes, we are," she nodded, suddenly shy again. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Josephine." As she climbed the stairs back to her room, Josephine realized something had shifted between them tonight. The concern she had felt waiting for his return, the relief at seeing him safe, these weren't merely the feelings of someone bound by contract. Something deeper was taking root, something that both thrilled and frightened her with its possibilities. The next morning, Josephine woke to the sounds of activity in the yard below her window. Dressing quickly, she went downstairs to find the house bustling with preparations. Mrs. Winters directed two young cowboys who were moving furniture in the sitting room, creating a space where chairs were arranged in rows. "What's happening?" Josephine asked. "Wedding preparations," Mrs. Winters replied briskly. "Pastor Wilson sent word he'll be here by noon." Ceremonies set for 2 o'clock. Josephine's heart began to race. Today, she had thought they had another day at least. Daniel entered from the kitchen, his injured arm now properly bandaged and supported by a sling. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Good morning." "I hope all this commotion didn't wake you." "No, Daniel, is the wedding really today?" He frowned slightly. "Pastor Wilson can only make the trip once this week. Tomorrow he has to be in Millerville for a funeral." He studied her face. "Is that a problem? We can postpone if you're not ready." Again, his consideration touched her. "No, it's not that. I just thought I had more time to prepare." Mrs. Winters snorted. "Prepare what? You've got your dress, don't you? Everything else is handled." "Yes, I have a dress," Josephine confirmed. She had packed her best gown, a cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim, anticipating this moment. Daniel seemed relieved. "Good. I've invited the neighboring ranchers and some folks from town. Small gathering, nothing fancy." "Will Roland Maddox be there?" Josephine couldn't help asking. Daniel's expression hardened. "No. After yesterday, he knows he's not welcome on Thornton land." Mrs. Winters interrupted. "Miss Franklin, if you're to be ready by 2, we'd best get you bathed and your hair done. I've got the copper tub set up in the back room." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The warm bath was a luxury Josephine hadn't expected on the frontier, and she savored it, washing away the dust and worry of the previous days. Mrs. Winters proved surprisingly skilled with hair, arranging Josephine's dark locks in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers from the garden. As Josephine dressed in her cream silk gown, a knock came at her door. "It's Daniel. May I speak with you? Through the door is fine." "Yes, of course," she called, smoothing the skirt of her gown. "I have something for you," he said. "Mrs. Winters can bring it in." The housekeeper entered a moment later, carrying a small wooden box. "From the boss," she said, a hint of a smile softening her usually stern features. Josephine opened the box to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the front engraved with intertwined roses. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It was his mother's," Mrs. Winters explained. "Only thing of value she had. She gave it to him before she passed, said he should give it to his bride someday." Touched beyond words, Josephine called, "Daniel, thank you. It's lovely. May I come in?" he asked. Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow but left the room without comment, passing Daniel in the doorway. He entered cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. He had dressed for the occasion in a new black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. Despite the sling, he cut an impressive figure. His eyes widened appreciably when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." She held up the locket. "And thank you for this. It means a great deal to me that you would give me something so personal." "May I?" he asked, taking the necklace from her hands. Josephine turned, lifting her hair as he stepped behind her. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he fastened the clasp around her neck, the brief touch sending a shiver down her spine. "There," he said softly as she turned back to face him. "Perfect." They stood for a moment, looking at each other with new awareness. Daniel cleared his throat. "I wanted to ask you something before the ceremony." "Yes. Are you certain about this? About marrying me?" His blue eyes were serious. "If you've had second thoughts, I would understand. I could arrange passage back to Boston or perhaps to San Francisco if you'd prefer not to return home." The offer stunned her. He was giving her a choice, a real choice, even now with guests arriving and preparations made. "You want me to leave?" she asked quietly. "No," he answered without hesitation. "I want you to stay, but only if it's what you want too." Josephine considered his words carefully. What did she want? A month ago, she would have said freedom from her father's control, perhaps a teaching position or work as a companion to a wealthy woman. But now, standing before this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who had built something magnificent from nothing, who looked at her as if she were something precious now her wants had changed. "I want to stay," she said firmly. "I want to marry you, Daniel." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise over the mountains. "I'm glad," he said simply, but the word contained multitudes. A commotion downstairs signaled the arrival of more guests. Daniel reluctantly stepped back. "I should go down. Pastor Wilson will be here soon." He paused at the door. "I'll see you soon, Josephine." After he left, Josephine touched the locket at her throat, her heart full of emotions she couldn't yet name. When Mrs. Winters returned to escort her downstairs, she was ready. The sitting room had been transformed. Chairs arranged in rows faced a small area where Daniel stood with a slender, gray-haired man in clerical garb. Wildflowers in mason jars added touches of color, and someone had hung white muslin curtains at the windows, softening the rustic interior. About 20 people filled the chair's ranch hands, neighboring farmers and ranchers, and a few women from town who watched Josephine with undisguised curiosity. Jack Miller stood beside Daniel as his best man, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes. As Josephine entered the room on Mrs. Winters' arm, the older woman having insisted on giving her away in the absence of family, a hush fell over the assembly. All eyes turned to her, but she saw only Daniel, whose face reflected a mix of awe and happiness that made her heart skip. The ceremony was simple and brief, the pastor's words traditional but heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Daniel's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. Josephine, to her surprise, found her own voice equally firm as she made the same promises in return. "The ring," the pastor prompted, and Daniel reached into his pocket, producing a gold band. "It was my grandmother's," he explained softly as he slipped it onto her finger. "I had it sized for you in town yesterday." The band fit perfectly, its worn surface speaking of years of love and commitment. Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes. "By the power vested in me," the pastor declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Thornton, you may kiss your bride." Daniel hesitated, as if unsure how she would receive this public display. Josephine made the decision for him, stepping forward and tilting her face up to his. His good arm came around her waist, drawing her close as his lips met hers in a gentle, tender kiss that promised more to come. The room erupted in cheers and applause, breaking the spell. Daniel pulled back, his eyes never leaving hers as he smiled. "Mrs. Thornton," he murmured, testing the name. "Mrs. Thornton," she repeated, surprised by how right it felt. The celebration that followed was unlike any wedding reception Josephine had attended in Boston. Long tables were set up in the yard, loaded with food prepared by Mrs. Winters and the wives of neighboring ranchers. A fiddler and banjo player provided lively music, and as the afternoon wore on, a dance area was cleared. Daniel introduced Josephine to what seemed like dozens of people, all of whom welcomed her with varying degrees of curiosity and warmth. The women, in particular, seemed eager to meet her, as wives were still uncommon enough in the territory to be something of a novelty. "You've caused quite a stir," Daniel commented as they finally found a moment alone, watching the dancing from the porch. "Half the unmarried men in the county are now riding back east for brides of their own." Josephine laughed. "I hope they are more forthcoming about their intentions than my father was about yours." Daniel's expression sobered. "I'm sorry about that deception." "If I had known, it's in the past," she interrupted gently. "Besides, things have turned out rather well, don't you think?" His eyes warmed as they held hers. "Very well indeed." The celebration continued into the evening, with lanterns hung from tree branches, creating a magical atmosphere as darkness fell. When the last guest had departed and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Daniel and Josephine found themselves alone on the porch, the sounds of night surrounding them. "Would you like to see the stars?" Daniel asked unexpectedly. Josephine nodded, and he led her away from the house, to a small rise where the view of the night sky was unobstructed by trees or buildings. The sight took her breath away, thousands upon thousands of stars blazing against the velvet blackness, more than she had ever seen in the light-polluted skies of Boston. "It's magnificent," she whispered. "This is one of my favorite spots on the ranch," Daniel said, standing close beside her. "I come here when I need to think, or just to remind myself how small our troubles really are in the grand scheme of things." Josephine turned to look at him, this man who was now her husband. In the starlight, his features were softened, the usual watchfulness in his eyes replaced by something warmer, more vulnerable. "Daniel," she said softly, "I know we've only known each other for a few days, but I want you to know that I'm glad to be here, glad to be your wife." He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "And I'm glad you're here, Josephine, happier than I've been in a very long time." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, hands linked, shoulders touching before Daniel spoke again. "It's getting late. We should go in." The implication hung in the air between them. They were married now, and this would be their first night together as husband and wife. Josephine felt a flutter of nerves, but also a surprising anticipation. The house was quiet as they entered, Mrs. Winters having retired to her small cabin behind the main house. Daniel led Josephine upstairs, past her room to the master bedroom at the end of the hall. It was larger than her temporary quarters, with a big four-poster bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a small sitting area near the stone fireplace where a low fire burned. Someone, probably Mrs. Winters, had turned down the bed and left a lamp burning low on the bedside table. "I had your things moved in this afternoon," Daniel said, suddenly seeming as nervous as she felt. "If you'd like to change, I can wait outside." "Thank you," Josephine said, grateful for his consideration. Alone in the room, she opened her trunk to find her nightgown and robe. As she undressed, removing the beautiful wedding gown and carefully hanging it in the wardrobe, she thought about the strange path that had led her here. A month ago, she had been a sheltered Boston girl with few prospects beyond a loveless marriage to one of her father's business associates. Now she was a rancher's wife in Montana Territory, married to a man she barely knew but who had shown her more kindness and respect in 3 days than her father had in 20 years. When she was ready, wearing a modest white cotton nightgown and a light robe, she called Daniel back into the room. He had removed his jacket and tie but was otherwise still dressed. "I'll give you some privacy to change," she offered, moving toward the door. "No need," he said quickly. "I mean, this is your room now, too. I don't want you to feel unwelcome in your own space." He turned his back to her as he changed into night clothes, a gesture of modesty she appreciated. And when he faced her again, he was wearing long cotton drawers and a loose shirt, his injured arm still in its sling. An awkward silence fell between them as they stood on opposite sides of the bed. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Josephine, I want you to know something. I meant what I said in my vows today. I will honor and cherish you." He hesitated. "But I understand that this isn't a conventional marriage. We're still getting to know each other. If you'd prefer to wait before we—" "That is, if you're not ready for the physical aspects of marriage, I would understand." His consideration brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "You would wait, as long as you need," he assured her. "I want a true partnership, Josephine. That means trust and respect come first." In that moment, something shifted in Josephine's heart. This man, this stranger who had become her husband, who could have demanded his marital rights without question, was instead offering her choice and agency over her own body. She moved around the bed to stand before him, looking up into his face with new eyes. "Daniel Thornton, I think I could fall in love with you very easily." His breath caught. "Josephine." She reached up, touching his face gently. "I'm not afraid. Not of you, not of being your wife in every sense." His good arm came around her waist, drawing her closer. "Are you sure?" In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. Unlike their brief wedding kiss, this one deepened quickly, his mouth moving over hers with increasing passion. Josephine felt herself responding, her body awakening to sensations she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I'll be gentle," he promised. "And if you want to stop at any point, just say the word." But Josephine didn't want to stop. As they came together on the big bed, learning each other's bodies with wonder and tenderness, she felt as if she were discovering a part of herself she hadn't known existed. Daniel was true to his word, gentle, patient, attentive to her responses. And when they finally became one, the momentary pain gave way to pleasure so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, nestled in the circle of his arm with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Josephine felt a profound sense of rightness. This man, this place, this was where she belonged. "Daniel," she whispered, not sure if he was still awake. His voice was drowsy. "Thank you for being kind." His arm tightened around her. "Always, Josephine. That's a promise I intend to keep." As summer gave way to autumn, Josephine found herself settling into life at Thornton Ranch with surprising ease. The rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the seasonal work cycles. The connection to the land suited her in ways city life never had. She discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed, and a resilience that surprised even herself. Daniel proved to be everything he had promised, and more kind, patient, and increasingly affectionate as their bond deepened. Their physical relationship blossomed along with their emotional connection, each night bringing them closer together. Josephine found herself falling more deeply in love with her husband with each passing day, and she could see in his eyes that he felt the same. Mrs. Winters, initially skeptical of the city bride, had become Josephine's staunch ally and teacher. Under her guidance, Josephine learned to manage the household affairs, preserve food for winter, and treat common ailments that arose among the ranch hands. In return, Josephine's education and organizational skills brought new efficiency to the ranch operations. True to his word, Daniel had invited her to help with the ranch accounts, and she had quickly proven her worth. Her father's dismissal of her business acumen had been a grievous error. Josephine had a natural head for figures, and a shrewd understanding of markets that Daniel came to rely upon. Together, they refined the ranch's breeding program and expanded their markets, increasing profits significantly. The only shadow on their happiness was Roland Maddox. After the incident with the cattle, he had been quiet for several weeks, but by late August, he had resumed his campaign of intimidation against smaller ranchers in the area. Two families had already sold out to him under pressure, and rumors circulated that he had hired gunmen from Denver to strengthen his position. Daniel worried, though he tried to hide it from Josephine. She saw it in the way he checked his rifle each night before bed, in the extra men he assigned to patrol the boundaries of their land, in the quiet conversations with Jack Miller that stopped when she entered the room. One crisp October morning, Josephine woke to find Daniel already dressed and preparing to leave while it was still dark outside. "Where are you going so early?" she asked, sitting up in bed. He came to sit beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Fall roundup starts today. I need to meet the men at the south pasture at dawn." "Be careful," she said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Daniel smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Always am. I've got something precious to come home to now." After he left, Josephine found it impossible to return to sleep. Rising, she dressed warmly against the autumn chill and went downstairs to help Mrs. Winters with breakfast preparations. The housekeeper seemed surprised to see her so early, but put her to work without comment. As they worked side by side, Josephine asked casually, "Mrs. Winters, have you heard anything new about Roland Maddox?" The older woman's hand stilled on the biscuit dough. "Why do you ask?" Daniel's worried. "I can tell, though he tries to hide it from me." Mrs. Winters sighed heavily. "Maddox bought the Jenkins place last week. That puts him right on our eastern boundary." She shook her head. "He's getting bolder, coming closer." "What does he want?" "Everything." Mrs. Winters' voice was hard. "Men like that are never satisfied, but mostly he wants Thornton water rights. Our springs and creeks are the best in the county. In a dry year, they're worth more than gold." Josephine absorbed this information thoughtfully. "Has Daniel ever considered selling the water rights, or leasing them?" Mrs. Winters looked scandalized. "Sell water rights? Girl, that's like selling your future. Water is life out here." "I understand that," Josephine assured her, "but I wonder if there might be a way to diffuse this situation before it comes to violence." "You can't negotiate with a rattlesnake," Mrs. Winters said flatly. "Some men only understand one language, and that's force." The conversation left Josephine troubled. As she went about her daily tasks, helping with the laundry, checking supplies in the pantry, working on the ledgers in Daniel's study, her mind kept returning to the problem of Roland Maddox. There had to be a solution that didn't involve bloodshed. Late that afternoon, as she was returning from the hen house with a basket of eggs, Josephine noticed a cloud of dust on the road approaching the ranch. Shading her eyes, she made out a group of riders, at least 6 of them coming fast. Heart racing, she hurried to the house, calling for Mrs. Winters. Riders coming, 6 or more, moving quickly. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression turned grim as she spotted the approaching group. "Get inside," she ordered, "and fetch the shotgun from behind the pantry door." Josephine did as she was told, her hands trembling slightly as she retrieved the weapon. She had learned to shoot over the summer, Daniel had insisted, saying every frontier wife needed to know how to defend herself, but she had never had cause to use the skill in earnest. By the time she returned to the front porch, the riders had reached the yard. At their head was a broad-shouldered man with a shock of silver hair and cold eyes that reminded Josephine of a predator. He dismounted with the ease of someone accustomed to life in the saddle, though his expensive clothes and gold watch chain marked him as more than a common cowboy. "Mrs. Thornton, I presume?" His voice was deep, with a smoothness that didn't match the hardness in his eyes. "Roland Maddox, a pleasure to finally meet the woman who's caused such a stir in our little community." Mrs. Winters stepped in front of Josephine, shotgun raised. "Get off this property, Maddox. You're not welcome here," he laughed, seemingly unconcerned by the weapon. "Now, Mrs. Winters, is that any way to treat a neighbor paying a social call?" His eyes moved past her to Josephine. "I've come to speak with Mrs. Thornton, not to cause trouble." "My husband isn't here," Josephine said, stepping forward despite Mrs. Winters' attempt to shield her. "Whatever business you have should be conducted with him." Maddox smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "But that's just it, Mrs. Thornton. I think you might be more reasonable than your husband. Women often have a better understanding of what's truly important: safety, security, the future." "Say your piece and be gone," Mrs. Winters snapped. Maddox sighed theatrically. "Very well. Mrs. Thornton, I've come to make you an offer. I want to buy this ranch lock, stock, and barrel. I'm prepared to pay twice what it's worth. Enough for you and your husband to start fresh somewhere else, somewhere safer." Josephine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "This ranch isn't for sale, Mr. Maddox, now or ever." "I understand your loyalty to your husband's dream," Maddox said, his tone condescending. "But dreams can turn to nightmares very quickly out here. Accidents happen, fires start, people disappear." He spread his hands. "I'd hate to see anything happen to you or your handsome husband." The threat was unmistakable. Josephine felt fear coil in her stomach, but she refused to show it. Drawing herself up to her full height, she met Maddox's gaze squarely. "Mr. Maddox, let me be perfectly clear. This ranch is our home. We will not be threatened or intimidated into selling, not for any price. Now, I suggest you leave before my husband returns with his men. He won't be nearly as polite as I've been." For a moment, Maddox's mask of civility slipped, revealing the rage beneath. Then he composed his features once more. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Thornton, a serious one." He remounted his horse with fluid grace. "Think about my offer. Think about what's at stake. I won't ask again." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men following close behind. As the dust settled, Mrs. Winters lowered the shotgun, her hands shaking slightly. "Lord help us," she murmured. "He's never come to the house before, never been so bold." Josephine felt cold all over. "We need to tell Daniel. He'll be back at nightfall with the men," Mrs. Winters said. "Until then, we bar the doors and keep the guns close." The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Josephine found it impossible to concentrate on her usual tasks, her mind replaying Maddox's veiled threats. By the time the sun began to set, her nerves were stretched to the breaking point. The sound of approaching riders set her heart racing again, but Mrs. Winters, who had been watching from the window, relaxed visibly. "It's the boss and the boys," she confirmed. Josephine hurried outside, unable to wait a moment longer to see her husband. Daniel dismounted quickly when he saw her, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" he asked, striding toward her. "You're pale as a ghost." She told him everything: Maddox's visit, his offer, his threats. With each word, Daniel's expression grew darker, his jaw clenching in barely controlled anger. "He came to my home," he said when she had finished, his voice dangerously quiet. "Threatened my wife." Jack Miller, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. "Boss, this changes things." "Coming to the house, that's crossing a line." Daniel nodded, his arm around Josephine's shoulders tightening protectively. "Get the men together, Jack. We need to talk." That night, after a tense dinner where Daniel ate little and said less, he called a meeting in the barn. All the ranch hands attended, along with Josephine, who had insisted on being included despite Daniel's initial reluctance. "Maddox has gone too far," Daniel told the assembled men. "Coming to my home, threatening my wife, I won't stand for it." He paced the length of the barn, his spurs jingling with each step. "But I won't ask any of you to fight my battles. If any man wants to ride out tonight, he'll go with my thanks and a full month's pay." Not a single cowboy moved. Jack Miller spoke for all of them. "We're with you, boss." "This is our home too." Daniel nodded, visibly moved by their loyalty. "Then here's what we do. Starting tomorrow, no one works alone. We double the guards on the herd and at the house. I'm sending for the marshal in Helena, but it'll be at least a week before he can get here. Until then, we watch each other's backs." The men nodded, their faces grim but determined. Josephine, listening from her place near the door, felt a surge of pride in her husband and these men who had become her extended family. But beneath that pride was a deep fear. Maddox had seemed like a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, by whatever means necessary. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Josephine voiced her concerns. "Daniel, what if he comes back with more men? What if someone gets hurt?" Daniel took her hands in his expression serious. "I won't lie to you, Josephine. This could get ugly before it's over, but I promise you, I'll do everything in my power to keep you and everyone on this ranch safe." "I know you will." She moved into his embrace, resting her head against his chest. "I'm not afraid for myself. I'm afraid for you." He held her tight, his chin resting on the top of her head. "I've got too much to live for to take foolish risks," he assured her. "I plan to grow old with you, Josephine Thornton." The sincerity in his voice soothed her fears somewhat. As they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Daniel's arms around her, Josephine tried to focus on the steady beat of his heart rather than the danger that seemed to be closing in around them. The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. The men worked in pairs, rifles always within reach. Daniel rarely left the immediate vicinity of the ranch house, coordinating the fall roundup from horseback, but staying close enough to return quickly if needed. Josephine found herself watching the road constantly, jumping at unexpected sounds and sleeping fitfully. The strain began to show on everyone's faces: dark circles under eyes, tight expressions, voices pitched low as if to avoid drawing attention. On the fourth day after Maddox's visit, Josephine was helping Mrs. Winters preserve the last of the garden vegetables when they heard a commotion in the yard. Hurrying to the window, they saw one of the young ranch hands, Jimmy Peters, galloping in, his horse lathered and heaving. "Fire!" he shouted as Daniel emerged from the barn. "Fire at the north pasture, the grass is burning." Daniel's response was immediate. "Jack, get the men. Bring every water barrel we've got." He turned to Jimmy. How bad, bad boss. Wind's pushing it this way, already jumped the creek. Daniel swore under his breath, then spotted Josephine in the doorway. Stay here, he ordered. If it gets too close to the house, take Mrs. Winters and head for town. Don't wait for me. Before she could protest, he was gone, riding hard with the men toward the column of smoke now visible on the northern horizon. Mrs. Winters gripped Josephine's arm. Prairie fire's nothing to fool with, girl. If it's jumped the creek already, it's moving fast. Could it reach the house? Josephine asked, fear tightening her throat. The housekeeper's expression was grim. If the wind shifts, yes. We need to prepare just in case. They worked quickly, gathering important documents, family mementos, and practical necessities into bundles that could be thrown into a wagon at a moment's notice. All the while, Josephine watched the smoke growing thicker, the sky darkening ominously to the north. Hours passed with no word from Daniel. The smoke grew worse, the smell of burning grass and wood reaching the house on the wind. Just as Josephine was preparing to hitch the wagon herself, determined to go looking for her husband, riders appeared on the ridge to the east, not Daniel and his men, but strangers, at least a dozen of them. Mrs. Winters, Josephine called, panic rising in her throat. Riders coming, not ours. The housekeeper appeared at her side, face paling as she saw the approaching group. It's Maddox, she said grimly. Set the fire as a distraction, I'd wager. Josephine felt cold despite the heat of the day. What do we do? Mrs. Winters handed her a rifle. We defend what's ours. The two women positioned themselves on the porch, weapons ready, as Maddox and his men rode into the yard. This time, there was no pretense of civility, no mask of neighborliness. Maddox's face was hard, his intentions clear. Where's your husband, Mrs. Thornton? He called, reining in his horse a safe distance from the house. Fighting the fire you started, Josephine replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Leave our property immediately, Mr. Maddox. He laughed, the sound chilling in its complete lack of humor. I don't think you're in any position to be giving orders, madam. Your husband and his men are miles away. It's just you and the old woman against me and my boys. He gestured expansively. I tried to be reasonable, offered good money for this place, but Thornton's too stubborn to see reason. And you think burning our land will change his mind? Josephine challenged. Maddox shrugged. Fire's a natural thing out here. Lightning strikes happen all the time. His cold eyes fixed on her. Accidents happen too. Sometimes whole families disappear. Bodies are never found. Mrs. Winters raised her shotgun. You take one step closer, Maddox, and you'll be the first body they find. He signaled to his men, who spread out, encircling the house at a distance. You can't shoot us all, old woman. And once we're done here, no one will question what happened. Just another tragedy on the frontier. Josephine's mind raced. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Daniel and the men might not return for hours if they managed to contain the fire at all. She needed to buy time somehow. Mr. Maddox, she called, lowering her rifle slightly. Perhaps we can still reach an agreement. Mrs. Winters shot her a startled look, but Josephine silenced her with a quick shake of her head. Maddox's eyebrows rose in interest. Oh, what kind of agreement? The water rights, Josephine said. That's what you really want, isn't it? Access to our springs and creeks for your cattle. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he could mask it. Go on. I propose a lease agreement. You get access to specified water sources on our land for your herds, in exchange for an annual payment and a guarantee of peace between our ranches. Maddox seemed genuinely taken aback by her offer. For a moment, Josephine thought she might have found a way out of their predicament. Then his expression hardened once more. Too late for that, Mrs. Thornton. I don't want part of what you have, I want all of it. and I mean to have it, one way or another." He raised his hand, clearly preparing to signal his men to advance. Josephine's finger tightened on the trigger of her rifle, knowing their chances were slim but determined to defend her home to the last. Before Maddox could complete the gesture, a shot rang out from the ridge behind him. One of his men cried out, clutching his shoulder as he toppled from his horse. More shots followed in quick succession, and Maddox's men scattered, looking frantically for the source of the attack. "Thornton!" one of them shouted, pointing toward the ridge where riders were now visible, galloping down toward the ranch house. Daniel was at their head, rifle in hand, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him rode Jack Miller and at least 10 of the ranch hands, all armed and firing as they came. Maddox cursed, wheeling his horse around. "Fall back," he shouted to his men. "Fall back." They retreated in disarray, several nursing wounds, as Daniel and his cowboys pursued them to the property line. Josephine watched from the porch, knees weak with relief, as the threat receded. When Daniel returned, dismounting so quickly he nearly fell, and ran to her, Josephine threw herself into his arms. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, hands moving over her as if to assure himself she was whole. "Did they touch you?" "No, we're fine," she assured him, clinging to him tightly. "But how did you know? The fire was a distraction, just like we thought it might be," Daniel finished for her. "I left Jack and half the men to fight it while I brought the rest back. Thank God we got here in time." He held her at arm's length, his eyes intense. "You were incredible, Josephine. Standing your ground, trying to negotiate. I've never been prouder." She managed a shaky smile. "It didn't work." "No, but it bought time. And it showed me something I already knew. You're the bravest, smartest woman I've ever met." He kissed her then, hard and desperate, not caring that they had an audience of cowboys and a grinning Mrs. Winters. When they broke apart, Jack Miller approached, his face streaked with soot. "Boss, the marshal's posse just arrived at the fire line. They're helping contain it now." "I told them what happened here." Daniel nodded grimly. "Good, this ends today. Maddox has gone too far." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The marshal, a grizzled veteran named Harker, arrived with his deputies and took statements from Josephine and Mrs. Winters about Maddox's threats and actions. 2 of Maddox's wounded men had been captured by Daniel's cowboys and turned over to the law. "We'll ride for Maddox's ranch at dawn," the marshal told Daniel as they stood in the yard. "Between your testimony, these 2 prisoners, and the evidence of arson at the fire site, we've got enough to arrest him for attempted murder, among other charges." Daniel nodded, his arm around Josephine's waist. "We'll be ready." That night, after the marshal and his men had made camp nearby and the ranch had finally settled into an uneasy quiet, Daniel and Josephine lay together in their bed, holding each other close. "I was so afraid," Josephine admitted in the darkness. "Not for myself, but for you, when I saw that smoke and knew you were out there." Daniel stroked her hair gently. "I was terrified too. All I could think about was getting back to you, protecting you." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Josephine. I think I've loved you since that first day at the train station, when you looked at me with those big, scared eyes but still held your head high." Tears filled Josephine's eyes at his declaration. "I love you too, Daniel, so much that it frightens me sometimes. I never expected to find you when my father sent me away." He pulled her closer. "I meant what I said earlier. You were magnificent today, standing up to Maddox, trying to find a peaceful solution even when it seemed hopeless." He paused. "Your idea about leasing water rights wasn't a bad one, you know. Not with Maddox, of course, but maybe with some of the smaller ranchers who are struggling. It could create goodwill, maybe even alliances." Josephine raised herself on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight filtering through the window. You'd consider it, he nodded. It's smart business, and it would help our neighbors without weakening our position. He smiled up at her. See, partners just like I promised. She leaned down to kiss him, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who valued her mind as well as her heart. As the kiss deepened, and their bodies came together in the familiar dance they had perfected over the months of their marriage, Josephine felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that she had never imagined possible. Whatever tomorrow brought with Maddox and the Marshal, they would face it together, partners in every sense of the word. The confrontation with Maddox came to a head the following morning. The Marshal and his deputies, accompanied by Daniel and several of his most trusted cowboys, rode to Maddox's ranch at dawn. Josephine insisted on going as well, despite Daniel's initial objections. In the end, he had relented, understanding her need to see this through to its conclusion. Maddox didn't surrender easily. When the Marshal presented the arrest warrant, he barricaded himself in his house with 3 of his loyal gunmen. A tense standoff ensued, with shots exchanged and threats shouted across the yard. It was Josephine who found the solution. Noticing smoke rising from the back of the house, she realized Maddox's men had started a fire, likely to create a diversion for escape. She alerted the Marshal, who quickly repositioned his deputies to cut off the rear exit. When Maddox and his men finally emerged, coughing from the smoke of their own making, they ran straight into the waiting lawmen. Justice was swift on the frontier. Maddox was tried in Helena for arson, attempted murder, and numerous other crimes. Testimony from his former employees, who came forward once he was in custody, revealed a pattern of intimidation, violence, and even murder stretching back years. He was sentenced to hang, and his vast holdings were divided and sold at auction, with many of the smaller ranchers he had driven out able to reclaim their land. For Thornton Ranch, the resolution brought a new era of prosperity and peace. Daniel implemented Josephine's idea about water rights, creating beneficial arrangements with neighboring ranchers that strengthened the community, and established the Thorntons as fair and forward-thinking leaders in the region. As winter settled over Montana territory, blanketing the land in pristine white, Josephine found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this place and this life. Sitting by the fire in their cozy bedroom, a letter from her mother in her hands, she smiled at the news it contained. "Good news?" Daniel asked, looking up from the book he was reading. "My mother is coming for a visit in the spring," Josephine replied, still somewhat amazed by this development. "She writes that my father's reaction to her decision was colorful, but she's determined. Apparently, she's been setting aside her own money for years, preparing for a time when she might need independence." Daniel smiled. "Like mother, like daughter, it seems." "Yes, I suppose so." Josephine set the letter aside, her hand automatically moving to her abdomen in a gesture that had become habitual in recent weeks. Daniel noticed, his expression softening. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," she assured him. "The morning sickness seems to be easing." The news of their expected child, discovered just after the Maddox affair was resolved, had filled them both with joy and wonder. Daniel had been attentive to the point of hovering, much to Mrs. Winter's amusement and Josephine's occasional exasperation. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, setting his book aside and moving to sit beside her on the small sofa. "With the baby coming and your mother visiting, perhaps it's time to make some of those improvements to the house we've been discussing." Josephine leaned into his embrace. "The extra bedrooms upstairs, and maybe a proper parlor for entertaining." He kissed the top of her head. "This place was built for a bachelor. It's time it reflected the family we're becoming." Family. The word filled Josephine with warmth. From a reluctant bride expecting cruelty, she had found not just kindness but love, respect, and a true partnership with this remarkable man. "I was thinking about that day at the train station," she said softly. "How terrified I was, expecting the worst." Daniel chuckled. "And instead, you got me hardly a prize." She turned in his arms to face him. "You were everything I never dared hope for, Daniel Thornton, when you said you'd be kind to me. It was the first time anyone had ever promised me that and meant it." His eyes, those summer sky blue eyes that had first captured her attention, grew serious. "It was the easiest promise I ever made, and the most important one I've ever kept. I love you," she whispered, resting her forehead against his. "I'm so glad my father sent me away, so glad I found you." "I love you too, Josephine." His hand moved to cover hers where it rested on her still flat abdomen. "And I love our child already. I can't wait to meet him, or her." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire and envisioning the future they would build not just for themselves, but for the child who would represent the union of their hearts and souls. The ranch would grow and thrive under their joint stewardship, becoming the legacy they would pass to the next generation. From the window, Josephine could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, gentle harbingers of the winter to come. But within the walls of their home, all was warmth and light, and love, the promise of that first day fulfilled beyond anything she could have imagined when she stepped off the train into her new life. Daniel had promised kindness, but he had given her so much more: a home, a purpose, a partnership, and a love that would last a lifetime. And she had found within herself a strength and courage she had never known she possessed. As Daniel's arms tightened around her, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, in this wild, beautiful land, with this good, strong man, building a future filled with promise and possibility. And it had all begun with 7 simple words that had changed her life forever. "I'll be kind to you. That's a promise made and a promise kept." Through fire and danger, through joy and sorrow, through all the challenges the frontier could throw at them, kindness had been the foundation upon which they had built something beautiful and enduring. Something that would stand the test of time, just like the mountains that watched over their land, just like the love that had grown between a reluctant bride and the cowboy who had met her at the train.